greatest achievements of men were at first nothing but dreams in the minds of men who knew that dreams are the seedlings of all achievements. A burning desire to be and to do is the starting point from which the dreamer must take off.
In the science of personal achievement, Napoleon Hill gives you the means to kindle the fire of burning desire in your life. These 17 universal principles of success are a composite of the techniques used by the world's greatest men. They learned these methods through trial and error. Here, you can learn them from a man who researched and organized them at the direction of steel magnate Andrew Carnegie.
I spent more than 20 years in interviewing America's best-known and most successful men. Men like W. Clement Stone, Alexander Graham Bell, William H. Taft, former President of the United States, John Wanamaker, the Philadelphia Merchant King, Woodrow Wilson, former President of the United States, Harvey Firestone, Dr. Frank Crane, F.W. Woolworth, Theodore Roosevelt, former President of the United States.
In this Nightingale-Conant program, these principles are listed in specific order. The beauty of this is that once you've listened to the program all the way through, you can then pick and choose the principle on which to focus, depending on your current needs. This program is assembled from a variety of live recordings and radio broadcasts done many years ago by Napoleon Hill. In some of them, the quality reflects their age, but the strategies they relate are as clear and valid today as they were when he first voiced them. In fact, you'll hear other speakers and authors repeating his statements as we approach the 21st century. And no wonder. Dr. Hill organized the world's first practical philosophy of human achievement. And these principles were continuously and successfully taught by Napoleon Hill beginning in 1928. The Napoleon Hill Foundation perpetuates his work today. You'll hear what may have been one of the first links between thought and action, and how you can benefit from it. There's the discussion about the mind-body connection, and the presence of infinite intelligence. You'll discover how to use definiteness of purpose, the mastermind alliance, and the power of applied faith. And you'll learn how to develop a personality to win in any situation. But Napoleon Hill's life is as powerful as his words in proving these principles. He was advisor to presidents, mentor to millions, and the author of several best-selling books, including the classic Think and Grow Rich. Listen, and you'll hear how he rose from poor beginnings to worldwide success. The year was 1883, and the place was a log cabin.
I was born down in the mountains of Virginia, where the section from whence I came was famous for three things: rattlesnakes, Mountain Dew, and revenue officers. I never had a pair of shoes until I was 10 years old. I never saw a railroad train until I was 12. Later on, I discovered why my father named me Napoleon. I have a great uncle, or did have before he died, in Memphis, Tennessee, by the name of Napoleon Hill. He was a multimillionaire cotton broker. I think if I stopped right there, you'd know why my father named me Napoleon. We expected that he would leave some of his money to me on account of my having his name. But when the will was read, when I was at the age of 14, he had left out the entire branch of hills from whence I came. And I think that was the greatest favor that anybody ever did me, because I know what happened to the ones that did get the money. Would you mind asking what?
What?
Nothing. Nothing. Well, I, having had no inheritance, had to go to work, and I learned to make my own money. The next best thing that ever happened to me was when I was assigned by Andrew Carnegie to devote 20 years to the building of this philosophy. One of his conditions was that I should earn my own way as I went along without any subsidy from him. I want to tell you right now, I thought that was disaster. But that was another blessing that came into my life. Having to earn my own way, I soon learned how to do it, and long before Mr. Carnegie died, I didn't need him anymore, financially or otherwise. I could make my own way. Carnegie was very smart in throwing me out on my own like that. He wanted me to learn to apply this philosophy as I went along, to make it work for myself. And he said a success philosopher living in a hovel without any money and his shoes not shined and needing a shave is no good example of selling success. If you want to be successful in helping other people to succeed, demonstrate that you can make your own philosophy work. And I think I have done that quite adequately and at all levels. Well, let me tell you the story of how I came to meet Andrew Carnegie. First of all, when I was in my early teens, I wanted to go away to college but didn't have any money. But I made arrangements with the Tazewell Business College to work my way through and took a secretarial course. And when I finished, I looked around and I had an inspiration that has been far-reaching, that has affected millions of people and will affect millions of people, some of them not yet born. I did something that has never been done before nor afterward, as far as I know, in the way of ensuring that I would go to work for the man that I chose. I recognized that if I picked out a very successful, a very prosperous, a very wealthy man and could work for him in close contact as a secretary, that I would appropriate all of his friends and much of his knowledge, and it would be worth a stupendous amount to me. I finally chose General Rufus A. Ayers of Virginia. He owned a railroad, a chain of banks, a chain of sawmills, a chain of coal mines, and in addition to that, he was a senior member of one of the most important law firms in the state of Virginia. And I made up my mind that General Ayers was going to have the great fortune of giving me my first job. And here is how I broke the news to him. I wrote him a letter and I said, Dear General Ayers, I have just completed a secretarial course at Tazewell Business College, and I know you will be glad to hear that I have chosen you as my first employer, period and paragraph. I am willing to go to work for you under the following conditions. I will work for the first 3 months and pay you a salary of any amount you name per month for that privilege, with the understanding that if at the end of those 3 months you wish to continue my services, you'll pay me that same salary. But meanwhile, you'll allow me to put on the cuff what I'll owe you, and you can take it out of what you'll owe me if you continue my services. Sincerely, Napoleon here. I guess that put him on the spot, didn't it? He didn't answer my letter. He called my father on the telephone. He said, I want you to send that boy down. I want to look at him. He didn't say anything about employing me. I went down to this huge law office. He got up from his desk and he came around, walked all the way around me 3 or 4 times, never opened his mouth. And then he went back and sat down at his desk and he said, I wish to ask you just one question. Did you write that letter yourself or did somebody tell you what to write? I said, General Ayers, I wrote that letter myself and I meant every word of it. He said, that's just what I thought after I looked you over. And you go to work tomorrow morning in the secretarial department at the regular beginning salary. A rather fabulous salary. At least fabulous in those days. $50 a month. But $50 then were $50. Now, $50 is not $50. It's something much less than that. Later on, when my brother and I matriculated at Georgetown University Law School intending to become lawyers, I looked around and made a contract with a magazine to write stories about successful men. Meanwhile, I had become a newspaper man, a cub reporter, and was fairly good at writing even then. Fortunately, I was assigned to Andrew Carnegie, the wealthiest man in the world at that time, and known throughout the world as being the best picker of men. That's how he became successful. He knew how to surround himself with mastermind allies that could do the things that he needed to have done. And nobody, please hear me on this, nobody ever rises above mediocrity who does not learn to use the brains of other people, and sometimes the money of other people, too. We call it OPM and OPB, other people's brains and other people's money. And it takes a combination of the two, believe you me. Well, Andrew Carnegie gave me 3 hours. And when the 3 hours were up, He said, this interview is just starting. Come on over to the house and we'll take it up after dinner. And I was so glad that he said, come on over to the house. If he'd said, go over to the hotel and come back tomorrow morning, I'd have been broke because I had just about enough money in my pocket to pay my way back to Washington. After dinner, we went out into the library, and he gave me one of the hardest sales talks that I have ever had or ever heard of in my whole life, about the necessity for a new philosophy that would conserve and pass on to the oncoming generations the sum total of what men like he had learned by a lifetime of trial and error method. And he said it was one of the sins of the ages that this knowledge, gained at such a tremendous price by so many men, was buried with their bones when they died. And nobody had ever organized it into a philosophy and made it available to the man of the streets. Well, I wondered why Mr. Carnegie was wasting his time on a cub reporter like me, giving me a sales talk like that. It was way beyond my capacity at that time. I was curious, and I kept my ears open and my mouth shut. Meanwhile, he told me what this philosophy would do for the man who organized it, what it would do for oncoming generations, how it would benefit people not yet born. And then he said, now, I've been talking to you about 3 days about this new philosophy. I've told you all that I know about it, about its possibilities and its potentials. I wish to ask you a question which you will please answer with a simple yes or no, but don't answer until you make up your mind which it is. If I commission you to become the author of this philosophy, give you letters of introduction to people whose help you'll need, are you willing to devote 20 years to research, because that's about how long it will take, earning your own way as you go along without any subsidy from me, yes or no? What would you have done if you had been sitting there in front of the richest man in the world with about enough money in your pocket to pay your way back home, who had propositioned you to go to work for 20 years without compensation or without a subsidy? What would you have said? Well, what you have in mind right now is what I had in mind, too. I knew very well that I couldn't do it. Isn't it strange that when you put an unusual opportunity before a person, a new opportunity, the chances are 1,000 to 1 that his mind will jump to the no-can-do part of it immediately, to the negative side. You think of all of the reasons in the world why he can't do it. I can think of about 3 right off the bat. First of all, I didn't have enough money to carry me for 20 years. Second place, I didn't have enough education to deal with these successful men that I'd have to deal with all over the United States and in other countries. And in the third place, and this was about the most serious of all, I was not absolutely too sure about the meaning of that word philosophy that Mr. Carnegie had been kicking around for 3 days and nights. So you can imagine what a fantastic thing that was. A young man with very little education sitting in front of this great man who had offered him an opportunity such as never has come to any other author at any time in the civilization of man. No author, as far as I've been able to tell, has ever had the cooperation and the collaboration of over 500 outstanding men to help create a literary work of any sort. That was the kind of an opportunity that was facing me. And here is an important thing I want to call to your attention. I didn't know this at the time, but I learned about it later. After briefing me for 3 days and nights on the potentials of this philosophy, on how it could be organized, on what it would do, Mr. Carnegie made up his mind that when he put the question to me, he would allow me only 60 seconds in which to say yes or no. 60 seconds, that's all. I didn't see it, but he's sitting there with a stopwatch behind his desk, timing me. And it took me exactly 29 seconds to make up my mind that I would accept. I had 31 seconds between me and an opportunity such as never come to another author. I have never known of any author in any field having so much help, so much guidance, given and supplied without money and without price. I was ready to go back to Washington, and Mr. Carnegie then did another thing. And if you don't get anything out of your trip except what I'm now about to tell you, it might well change your entire destiny and through you the destiny of many other people. Mr. Carnegie said, well, Napoleon, 20 years is a long time, and I have given you a pretty tough assignment, and you have accepted it. I want to warn you now that you're going to have many temptations along the way, long before you complete your 20 years of research, to quit. Because that's the easiest thing that a weakling can do, is quit. I don't think you're a weakling. If I had thought so, I would not have given you the opportunity. But I do know that you need something to bridge over your temptations to quit if and when they do come. I'm now going to give you a formula that will enable you to condition your mind so thoroughly that nothing in the world can stop you from going ahead and completing the task to which I have assigned you. I was taking all this down in shorthand. He said, I want you to write very slowly, and I want you to underscore every word that I speak now. And here's the message that I want you to repeat to yourself at least twice a day, once just before you go to bed at night and once just after you get up. Looking at yourself in a mirror. You're talking to Napoleon Hill now, mind you. And here's what you say to him. Andrew Carnegie, I'm not only going to equal your achievements in life, but I'm going to challenge you at the post and pass you at the grandstand. And I threw my pencil down. I said, now, Mr. Carnegie, let's be realistic. You know very well I'm not going to be able to do that. At that time, Mr. Carnegie was rated as a billionaire, probably the first and maybe the only billionaire this country has ever created, as far as I know. He said, why, of course I know you're not going to be able to do that unless and until you believe it. But if you believe it, you will. But they said, let me ask you to do this. Try it out for 30 days. Will you do that? Well, I said, yes, that's a reasonable request. I certainly will, but I had the fingers on both hands crossed. I knew doggone well it wouldn't work. The idea of a youngster in his early 20s promising to equal and outdo the achievements of a man who had reached the stage of a billionaire, why, it was so ridiculous it wasn't even funny. It even scared me. I thought Mr. Carnegie lost his mind. I came very near walking out on him. It was just something that was too good to be true. But I promised. And when I got back to Washington, my brother and I had an apartment. When I went to go over this formula, I didn't want my brother to know what a big fool I'd made of myself, because I had some news to break to him that were not going to be good anyway. I had agreed to pay the expenses of the two of us through school, and I was going to have to tell him if I was dropping out, and he'd have to earn his own way. I went into the bathroom, and I closed the door real tight, and I got real close up to the glass and almost whispered this formula. And as I turned around, in my mind's eye, I saw the real Napoleon Hill standing there, and I said, you darn liar, you know very well you're not going to be able to do that. Only darn is not the word I used. It was a much more definite and stronger word. And I felt like a fool, like a thief, going through a thing like that, a farce. And that's just what it seemed like. But I said, well, after all you promised, Mr. Carnegie, go ahead and try it. Well, for the first week, or just about the first week, I had an attitude of feeling like I was doing something foolish. And then all of a sudden, about the beginning of the second week, something inside of me said, why don't you change your mental attitude about this? Do you realize that Andrew Carnegie is the richest man in the world? That he is known all over the world as the best picker of men in the world, and if he chose you to do a job like this, he must have found something in you that you didn't know was there. Why don't you change your mental attitude? And ladies and gentlemen, I started to change my mental attitude. And if I hadn't have done so, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today. And I wouldn't be talking to millions of people in this and other countries of the free world through my books if I hadn't changed my mental attitude and become positive instead of negative. I started in to repeat this in earnest. And by the end of the month, I not only believed that I'd catch up with Mr. Carnegie, but I knew that I would excel him. And believe you me when I tell you that I have long since attained that objective. And I'll tell you why I've attained it. Mr. Carnegie made not over 20 or 25 millionaires at the most. The millionaires that I have had the privilege of making, they're legion. They're all over the world. But that's not the main claim for my having outranked Mr. Carnegie. I have brought men and women together in a spirit of understanding that didn't exist. I've helped men and women to find themselves in all walks of life. I have saved men and women from suicide by helping them to find themselves. I have done for the world things that Mr. Carnegie never did do. And not only that, But what I have done has been recorded, it's been tested, it's being taken to a free world, and it's going to benefit millions of people who are not yet born.
You will be able to benefit as well if you listen and apply these 17 principles. Action is the key to success.
And of course, we will be